r/AskReddit. Police officers of Reddit, what criminal actually impressed you with their criminal skills? The Eyes has noticed our thief doubled his income that year and then the next year had a slump, but somehow managed to buy a whole heaping lot of stuff with cash that had to be unreported. He bought a Land Rover, some sports car, can't remember type, a 400k house, a 30k pool, all with cash that was unaccounted for. A check of cell phone records had one of the cell phones pinging about an hour away from the crime scene in the middle of the night. And the truck he had was the same type of truck that showed up at the scene, because one of them turned his phone on and called his wife to tell her he was out with said guys, but at a bar. It was a lot of little things, but it was enough altogether to make a pretty decent case and a jury convicted him at trial. Edit. There are some other evidentiary pieces I know I can't remember, but overall he did a surprising amount of planning, but just got too excited with his spending/laundering of gold. Once had a guy who shoplifted on an industrial scale. He stole hundreds and sometimes thousands of pounds worth of merchandise from a particular well-known high street clothing store. Every day, he'd go to different branches all over the country, UK obviously. He spoke nicely and was smartly dressed. He just used to fill up bags with high-value products and walk out. He had a warehouse type unit somewhere. Police never found it with his own till because he would generate till receipts for these items and go back to return them at a different branch and get cash refunds. He was at it for years, made enough to put his kids through private school. When he got caught he was jailed for about a year. Our shoplifting sentencing guidelines are absurdly low. When he came out he got back on it. Police still couldn't find his base. He was being investigated and was on bail. One occasion when he answered his bail at the police station, the police had a 6-man surveillance team ready to tail him and track down the warehouse he was using. He lost them within 2 minutes of leaving the station. When he came for trial, based on the CCTV evidence we had from the various shops, the case got thrown out. The footage wasn't good enough to make out his features exactly, and the officer who purported to identify him hadn't followed procedures. After he was thus acquitted he was due to be investigated for some other matters, but he gave the police and security the slip from the court before he could be arrested. Even I was impressed, and I was prosecuting him. I'm not a police officer, but know some guys who are. Best one I heard was a guy who would drill a tiny hole beside a window to open the latch. He would then enter at night and go straight to the front door and open it so he could make a quick exit if needed. If he couldn't open a door, he would leave again immediately. He stole stuff, then closed the window and locked the door behind him. Most people had no idea they had been robbed. He took wallets off bedside desks while people slept beside them, or sometimes just took some cash and cards, but left the wallet. When he got caught, he was making a plea deal, so it was in his interest to admit all crimes, so he couldn't later be prosecuted again for them. He took police round dozens of houses, and each had a tiny drill hole, and every house owner thought they had lost wallets and credit cards, never knowing they had been burgled. Stupidest one. A kid broke into his school at night and stole 10 laptops. It was snowing that night. Police came when the alarm went off, and there was one set of footprint in the snow that led them from the school the whole way to the kid's front door. When I was a rookie I got a call at 3 AM one night about a hold-up alarm going off at an ATM. I respond and don't really take the call that seriously at first because I'm thinking, no way a hold-up alarm is being triggered at 3 in the morning. I get there and start checking the bank when I see a guy walking through the drive-thru. Stupid me strolls over and calmly says, "Hey man, come over here and talk to me for a minute." He bolts and I take off after him, only to realize I left my handheld in my car. I run back and call it in, and my partner shows up shortly after. Well, we can't find the guy and start looking around. The guy spray painted the ATM camera and he drive-through camera, which set off the alarm. About an hour later I see a vehicle with out-of-state tags driving slowly through the drive-thru, and after running the plate, he has fictitious tags. We search the vehicle and can find absolutely nothing but a very long tree branch in the back of the SUV. We write him 4 fictitious tags and send him on his way for my sergeant. The next day my investigator gets a call from the FBI because they had this guy's name flagged and saw where we ran him. He had been hit in ATMs in Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Tennessee. We were the first department that actually came in contact with him. He would spray paint the cameras or use the tree branch to turn high cameras away. After the alarms go off, he would wait nearby for police to leave. He would then come back and saw the hinges off the ATMs and take the money. He stole approximately $150,000 over a 6-month period. He was caught a few weeks later by a guy I went to the academy with. I was an MP at Fort Carson. The young man was in the service for 2 years before a dishonorable discharge sending him back home to Pennsylvania. When he got home he used his uniform to get discounts and praise. One day he decided to hop on a plane to Colorado. He arrives in full uniform but with lieutenant rank on. Gets off the plane and uses the government transportation to get on base. He doesn't have an ID, but shit he is an officer, so they let him on. Then he stayed at the in-processing barracks without paperwork because hell, he is an officer. Stays there for weeks. He goes walking to the PX and comes across a woman with a flat tire. He helps her change it out and she invites him over for dinner. There he meets her husband and their kids, then convinces them that he is waiting for housing and they let him live with them for a month. He cleans the house and babysits the kids. One time he went to this guy's unit and chewed a supply sergeant out to help the guy he was living with. The only reason this came to light is because of one phone call he made to his mother from the in-processing barracks. She became worried about him and called them. His mother let the people know he was not in the military. After that the search began. I was in MPI and got to pick him up. He gave me a straightforward statement and was genuinely nice. I just remember sitting on the office couch with him watching TV waiting for him to get transferred from my custody. I told him that I was genuinely impressed and that after whatever happens to him happens, that he could get it together and do well. He wasn't the brightest kid, but damn he had balls. I guess that is what it really takes. This guy in high school, we'll call him Lewis, was a known drug dealer. He didn't make it a secret. Everyone bought weed and harder stuff off of him. The cops constantly pulled him over to search him, and whenever a drug-related thing happened at school he was often the first kid they pulled into the principal's office. But they would never catch him with any drugs. The principal used to turn all of his possessions inside out on a weekly basis. Apparently schools can do that, but cops can't. They regularly cut locks off his gym locker and his regular locker in hopes of finding his stash, but they never found it. One time there was a rumor going around that his stash was stored in a locker not assigned to anyone, which prompted the administration to search every single locker in the school. I remember we had to stand in the hallway and unlock it so the principal could have a look inside. They definitely caught people with drugs, but not the Lewis. Turns out he started that rumor. Drug dogs were a regular occurrence. Once a month they brought them into the school, and they were present at every sports game. Lewis was one of the only, if not the sole supplier for the whole school. The administration had no idea what to do. They would catch kids with weed, and the kids would flat out say I bought this from Lewis. Lewis would encourage them to say it. They would then flip Lewis shit inside out. Cops would search his car, and he consented to all of it, and laughed when they found nothing. This was probably close to 15 years ago now. The vice principal loves to tell the story about how they eventually caught him. VP's younger son asked for these shoes for Christmas that had a secret compartment in them. Light bulbs go off in his head. The first day back after holiday break, he calls the school's dare officer and pulls Lewis out of class. They bring him into the office and flip all of his shit out on the table. Then the VP tells him to take his shoes off. Turns out his hunch was right. He had hidden compartments in his shoes, but there were no drugs in there. I guess Lewis is laughing his ass off at this point. This was pre everyone owned a cell phone era. Lewis has the audacity to explain that he hasn't seen any of his classmates for 3 weeks. He had not taken any orders yet. Had the VP waited a day, he would have caught him. Edit. A lot of people want to know what happened to Lewis. From what I can recall, he had been arrested a few times on small charges, cleaned his act up, had 2 kids, got married, and is now GM of the most profitable Taco Bell on the East Coast. Smartest criminal. Suspect would go door to door saying he was with Publishers Clearinghouse. He would tell people they were one of several finalists. He then explained he would need their name, date of birth, and social security number to verify who they were. After that, he would ask what hours they weren't home, so they could ensure if the victim won the prize, they would be home. Naturally, he would break into their homes when they weren't home and steal all their valuables. To top it off, he would steal their identity and open a bunch of credit card/payday loans in their names afterwards. After over 50 cases, I finally caught the guy. Made off with over $500,000 in 3 months before he was caught. Dumbest criminal. Suspect was robbing a gas station late at night. Suspect pointed a gun at the cashier demanding money. The cashier was surrounded by plexiglass all around. Cashier refused to give suspect the money and hit the panic alarm, which locked the door. Suspect was angry and fired a shot at the cashier. The bullet ricocheted off the plexiglass and struck him in the forehead. The bullet knocked him unconscious, but didn't penetrate the skull. As I arrived, the bullet was still protruding from his forehead, and he was knocked out. He got 99 years for his stupidity. The best part was the cash register only had $60 in it. Was not involved in this case, but was something we learned about. 2 employees of a soccer betting company colluded to rig odds and make big money. One would be in the office rigging the odds of the purchased ticket and the other would be in person purchasing the ticket at the moment the odds were tweaked. They would always buy both sides to pay out 3:1 so that whatever the result, they would win an estimated one portion which is in excess. This was possible because of an option to allow no draws with the effect that the bettor will get back his capital. Therefore, if a draw arose, it would simply result in them getting their monies back. To avoid detection, they made sure that their potential winning was always below the statutory minimum which required winners' identification to be recorded. They also made sure to go to different outlets when making the purchases. However, their grand scheme was eventually foiled, not by their own mistake, but by a busybody before them in the queue. The said customer had some issues with buying his ticket and eventually wrote in to make a complaint. Upon investigating the tapes from the outlet where the complaint came from, the company realized that their employee was making a purchase in their own outlets, which was clearly prohibited. This then led the company on a chain of inquiry which eventually led to a hefty jail term and fine for both of the criminals involved. Friend's dad was a cop. 3 to 4 years ago my friend's dad had the duty of patrolling the streets to make sure there was no criminal activity. After a long day he was called by a distressed man who had left his car keys inside his new Mercedes-Benz, and after trying for 2 hours they both realized there was no way but to call the company to get it out, which would result in a $200 bill. Luckily for that owner of the car, a suspiciously looking man walking down the street told him he would do it for him for $20. My friend's dad and the owner seemed skeptical, but honestly couldn't give a shit, so they let him. After being tired of their attempts, the guy in less than 2 minutes went to the top of the car, punched the roof extremely hard, then bumped the driver's seat door, and voila, it opened. The owner gave the guy his $20 and off he went. 2 weeks later the cop arrested the guy for stealing a car. Edit. If I remember what my friend told me correctly, the guy told the police officers of how he did it, and he detailed something about how the Mercedes model had a specific switch under the roof. I think it was the roll of a sensor used to detect if the car has rolled over or not to open the doors. The guy just knew his Mercedes, I guess. My partner and I responded to a burglary call at a house late one night. When we got there we heard the back fence rattle and knew someone jumped the fence to flee. We set up a perimeter and ended up catching the burglar with the stolen goods. As I put him in the back seat of the squad car he began throwing up. He drank a bottle of whiskey while stealing the things from the house, and after running from us the liquor didn't sit well. I rolled the window down so he could puke on the outside of the car instead of the inside. We drove back to the house to complete the report, and he told me there was another person with him inside the house and he knew where the suspect was. He motioned to a house 2 blocks away that had a garage door partially opened. He said his friend went inside and was hiding in there. I told my rookie partner to stay by the squad car while me and a few others checked the house. I made it to the garage and realized nobody was in there and immediately heard tires squealing and a car speeding off. I ran back to the house knowing what happened. Before I got there, the burglar in my backseat was now the car thief in the front seat driving my squad car away from the scene. Naturally everyone there jumped in their squad cars and the search was on for the stolen squad car. We found the squad car about 20 minutes later abandoned behind a house where a civilian was reporting their car stolen. The civilian left their car running to warm up and the suspect stole that car to get away. About an hour later the suspect was seen joyriding around where the burglary happened and the chase was on. There were approximately 20 different units chasing this suspect throughout the city until the suspect finally crashed and was taken into custody. He is now serving 19 years in federal prison due to the fact he was a convicted felon, and when he stole the squad car he also removed several guns I had inside the car, and was charged with being a felon in possession of a firearm. I was mad and embarrassed at the time, but I have to hand it to him for outwitting us. He later told us he was double jointed and knew he could slip the handcuffs off and get them around to the front of his body. He said he made the story up of the second suspect in order to get us away from the car so he could use it to get away. Okay, so obligatory not a police officer, but I have source. So this kid from near where I grew up decided to contact a guy on Craigslist who was selling a plane for his relative who was deployed in Afghanistan. The guy selling the plane doesn't know this is a 17-year-old kid and just tells him, hey, the plane's in the hangar, go check it out. Kid goes and checks the plane out, tell the guy he's not interested. This is where it gets good. The kid then proceeds to teach himself to fucking fly and starts joyriding the plane. Not once or twice, like every week for 6 months. He gets a job like 80 miles away and uses the plane to fly to work. There's an interview in the first article I ever read about him where his coworker says something like, yeah, although it was odd when he showed up for work one day and landed the plane on the road. He finally got caught by a suspicious pilot who reported him, and eventually the police looked into it and put 2 and 2 together. He got away with it for so long for a couple reasons, one being small M in airports, the other being the old planes can run on 91 octane. So he brought his own gas and didn't need to interact with anyone at the airport really. We all can aspire to have half the balls this kid does. In the late 80s I had a Dodge Dart Swinger. I bought it and never registered it or plated it. Back then in Ontario you kept the plates on the vehicle, never insured it either, and, well, truth be told, I had never bothered to get a license. It was a great car, but only the driver's side front brake worked. It was great at turning left as all you had to do was stand on the brakes and it would 4-wheel slide around the corner. A great trick for a 17-year-old. So me and my GF are taking our new kitten to the vet and it squirms out of her arms and decides to hide at my feet while I'm driving. I reach down and try and drag her out as traffic stops in front of me. I can't step on the brake as I might crush her. As I frantically dig her out from behind the pedals and step on the brake, the car just skids on its one braking wheel and I rear end the car in front. We are downtown and there is a bus behind and it all goes crazy. I get out and go to the lady in front. No one is hurt. It's just a fender bender and I convince her to pull to the side while we sort out insurance details. She pulls over and I burn it down a side street. The GF is flipping and yelling and I pull into a parking lot and go around back, park the car, roll down the windows and throw the keys into the bush. Hell, I had only paid $500 for the car and it was a wreck anyway. We walk away while she yells and screams at me and that's all, until about 3 years later I'm pulled over in a completely legitimate car for a minor speeding infraction and get arrested for an outstanding warrant for a fail to remain at the scene of an accident. I go to the station and they tell me it's about a green Dodge Dart rear end accident. I act stupid and say it wasn't a Dart, it was a motorcycle, and yes, I had a rear ender, but there was only damage to my bike and everything was fine. Court date arrives. The Crown goes on about a motorbike accident. The insurance co is going on about a green Dodge Dart. It's a shit show. The judge gets mad, reams them all out, and makes them apologize for wasting my time. End of. I walk away with nothing. Not a police officer, but I had impressed my friends and myself with my skills. About 15 years ago, when I was younger and dumber, I had a lead foot. I loved to speed, and I did it so much that my license was suspended. At the time, 2 speeding tickets within 2 years of each other equals suspension of driving privileges in IL. I'm not a speeder anymore, and I don't condone it. I'm just sharing my story of how I got away with being caught speeding one time. I was dating someone who lived in Wee at the time, but he would have to drive to see me in IL, as my license was suspended. Feeling bad for him having to drive much more than me, one late night I offered to drive him and our friends all back to his place in Wee using his car. The stretch of I-94 that brings you into Wee from IL is notoriously sprinkled with speed trap cops, but being young and dumb, I still sped, although with a very watchful eye. It was probably 1 or 2 AM and there were few cars on the road while heading north in Wee. I kept my eyes so peeled that not only was I watching 4 police cars ahead of me, but I was also watching cars behind me in the rear view, in case one that I just passed happened to be a cop who was using radar. I had no radar detector because I was driving my BS car. I was lucky for the majority of the drive, but as I watched one car pass in the opposite direction, I saw it slow down and veer toward the center median of the highway and proceed to make a U-turn. The blue and red lights went on. My heart sank. Here I'm driving on a suspended license with my BF, his friends, and driving his car. How embarrassing would it be to be arrested for driving while suspended in front of everyone? Hindsight, upon reflection, my own personal embarrassment was the least of my true problems back then. So, stupidly/brilliantly, I sped up to get to a nearby exit ramp. As soon as I was close to the ramp, I killed the headlights. This car, being slightly older, did not have daytime running lights, so from a distance I was probably not visible to the pursuing officer. The only trouble is, when you are trying to be invisible to a cop and you're speeding, eventually you're going to have to brake, which means brake lights will give you away. And brake I did when I reached the end of the ramp, but I used the parking brake to stop us. To my knowledge, no parking/emergency brake system activates the brake lights. And thank all that is good in this world that the darn brake even mechanically worked. Older cars sometimes have e-brakes that cease to function due to lack of use. I got off the ramp quickly and pulled into a nearby driveway that was lined with trees, again using the parking brake to stop me, and just waited. The trees provided ample coverage from afar. I'm not sure if the cop saw me exit the highway, but I'm pretty sure he was pursuing me, as the highway was mostly deserted in the wee hours of the morning as I passed him. Maybe I gave him a spook when I disappeared. I sure was spooked. I hope this isn't incriminating at this point, but just to be clear, I used to have a lead foot. These days I have a lot more respect for my world and its inhabitants, and I have much more patience than I used to, which is likely why I haven't had a speeding ticket in about 15 years. We get a call reporting that the phone system of major UK bank has been hacked, and that the caller has had several £1,000s stolen from their account as a result. Seems unlikely, but officers went round to see what had happened. Obviously the bank's system was fine, but scammers had done something fairly clever. Turns out that there is a way in the UK of keeping a phone line open when only the recipient hangs up. The scammers called the victim and pretended to be from the bank before asking for account details. Victim was suspicious, so hung up and called the bank back at their real telephone number. However, the scammers held the line open and played a dial tone down the line, so the victim thought that she was making a new call. Then they played a ring sample before a new scammer answered the call and took the details pretending to be the bank. I've heard of it a few times since in the press, but the first time I came across it was on duty and no one had any idea what was going on. Not a police officer attorney, but this one is pretty good. We had a guy who ran one of those we buy your gold places. Typically he did a moderate business, but it just wasn't enough for the lifestyle he wanted. So he decided to rob a better jewelry store. He found one that sold only very high quality jewelry and was about 300 miles away from his house. He visited them one day and got the name of the safe they used, noted the type of alarm, cameras, etc. Then went home and bought the exact same safe. He spent months planning how to break into the safe without possibly tripping the alarm, but he wasn't having any luck. He was dedicated, kept working on it, and finally came up with a plan. He got his brother and another person, I can't remember relation, and they turned off their cell phones at home, then drove to the store, got there in the middle of the night. They climbed onto the roof, cut a hole in the ceiling and purposefully tripped the alarm. They put the ceiling tiles back and laid down on the roof. The owner came and the police came. The owner checks out the store. Nothing looks wrong. Police haven't seen anyone, so the owner decided his alarm must have malfunctioned. He turns off the alarm because hey, he'll be back here in a couple hours to open, sends the officer away, and he goes home. The thief, able to hear the system is disabled from his hiding spot, then opens hole in the ceiling again. They casual cat drop into the business and basically wipe the place out. Estimates ran around 4 to 6 million in gold. They take all the gold home where he starts to slowly mix it in with his regular business. He melts all the gold down to sell, so it's not like the pieces can be identified. They generate some fake business receipts, but lots of his transactions are cash based and a small business keeping sloppy records is nothing new. Meanwhile, the jewelry store owner feels like a complete idiot, and the cops only find one lone cigarette butt inside, no prints. They must have worn gloves. This police also get a security image from a business outside of a black truck coming and going at the right time, but the license plate is obscured, and the thieves are covered up enough the poor quality camera can't catch much that's helpful. I believe the cigarette came back with a partial match to one of the sidekicks. Now mind you, a partial DNA match is pretty mediocre evidence at best, even though juries love even partial DNA that gets the police looking in the right direction. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.